Hi everybody, I am Kelly Hernandez and I'm going to show you the books that I picked out to show color. The first one I'm super excited about because this was actually my very favorite book when I was growing up. It is called Hey Al by Arthur Yorinks. I don't know if you guys have seen this one or read this one. I don't even know how many times I read this as a child. I absolutely love this book. Not sure why, something about it just struck me, I guess, but it was just always my absolute favorite. So for those of you who haven't seen this book, it is about a man named Al and his dog Eddie, who basically live in the city and kind of have this boring janitor job and a boring life in the city in this little tiny apartment. And then, um, well, I'll kind of go through the story as I show you the pictures. But as you can see, like I said, they live in this little drab apartment in the city. So this one uses color to kind of show, as you can see in this first picture of the apartment, it's all brown and it's kind of dreary and not very exciting. There's not a lot of color in their lives. So it kind of adds to the story as far as you can sense why they find that it's boring and there's not a lot of excitement in their life and there's not a lot of color, not a lot of beauty per se to their world. So it shows several pictures at the beginning of them in their boring little brown apartment. And then a little bit into the story, this bird shows up at their window and he essentially tells them that if they meet him there the next morning, that he will whisk them off to this wonderful paradise where they'll be happy and will never have any worries or cares again. And so, of course, living in this drab apartment, they decide to go ahead and take the bird up on it. So they get all packed and ready, and the next morning they wait for this bird to show up. And when the bird does show up, just like he promised, he whisks them off to this beautiful world. So then you go from being in this drab, boring brown apartment to this beautiful paradise with all these wonderful colors. So the illustrator uses color to show the stark contrast between their boring day-to-day life in their drab apartment and then this gorgeous paradise that they travel to. So, as you can see again, there's more pictures of this beautiful paradise that they take off to with the bird. And so they live here happily and they think that life can't possibly get any better than it is. Um, it shows them soaking under the waterfall and enjoying life. But then what ends up happening is they start to realize that they themselves are actually turning into birds, as you can see. And so what happens in the story is they ultimately decide that they don't want to be turned into birds, and so they decide that life back in their boring apartment in the city would be much better, and they decide to fly back to the city. So it follows them as they fly back to the city, and then you see Al as he reaches his apartment. And he's back to his boring old life and his boring little tiny apartment. But him and Eddie are so happy to have each other and to be back to their normal selves. And then at the very end of the story, we see the use of color once again. If I can show you this, they decide that they're happier being back in their little apartment, but they decide to add a splash of color to their life. So you can see Al starting to paint his walls yellow. So again, they're using color here to show that change from living in this boring brown apartment and then deciding to add a little color to their lives to bring paradise basically back to their own house with them. So a couple great uses of color. There's also some use of space that I wanted to show you that show, like this one, for example, uses space to show distance. You have Al and his dog Eddie in the foreground closer up and bigger, and then in the back you have over here the city, which shows the buildings nice and small, which they use that space essentially to show distance, to show that the city is further back. So there's a couple. Here's another one actually that's kind of the same thing. When they're in paradise, it shows the waterfall off in the distance. It's smaller and made up higher to show, to use that space to show distance. So a couple of great examples of both color and space in this book. The next book I want to show you that for color is called Cordelia. This one is by Michelle Nelson Schmidt, and it is an Usborne book. For those of you who are not familiar with Usborne, they make fantastic books. I absolutely love them. So this one is the story about Cordelia who can fly, and she has these bright, colorful pages where she's so happy, and it shows her flying around with her beautiful, bright clothes on, and she's just happy as could be, flying with the birds. But then what happens is, even though Cordelia is so happy that she can fly and she lives this magical life, you get to this point where it starts to tell you in the story that her friends basically don't believe that she can fly. They say nobody can fly. So they tell her, that's not possible, you can't fly. And so, unfortunately, Cordelia starts to believe them. She says, oh my gosh, if they say I can't fly, maybe it's true. And so then we see the use of color start to change. On this next page, it talks about how she starts to believe that she can't fly, and it shows these bluebirds and all these sad feelings. And there's a lot of use of the color blue when it's talking about her being sad. And then here we have the moon and the stars, who she's not visiting anymore because she can't fly anymore. And then this is where I really love the use of color. It shows Cordelia walking along, and she's really sad that she's discovered she can't fly. And you can see her bright colors getting more dull as we go along. And then on the next page, it actually changes to just gray. And then if you read that page, it actually says, as the days passed, Cordelia stayed on the ground. Life became gray. There was no color. There was no sound. So these next couple pages, everything's gray because Cordelia is so sad and upset that she can't fly anymore because she doesn't believe she can fly. Well, then she starts to think, you know what? I think I can fly. And so it shows her going from gray back to color. And it shows her flying again once with the birds and being so happy. And so then it shows her happy and flying once again. So I love the use of color in this book because, like I said, it basically shows her mood. You know, she goes from being happy and everything's colorful and bright to being sad and everything's gray and dull. So there's a couple of great uses of color. The other thing I like that I wanted to show you is are the shapes in this book. There are several basic shapes. We have, of course, the round moon, and then the basic star shapes. And I really like the shapes because they kind of add to this story. They're really simplistic, you know, there's not a lot of detail in them. But we have these nice simple shapes that really just add to the story. So there's a couple of good examples of both color and shape in this book. Again, that one was called Cordelia. And then we had Hey Al to show my examples of color. So I hope you guys enjoyed those. And thank you so much.